I can speak for myself and probably everyone behind me. This has been absolutely heinous and horrific, something that the normal investigator, the normal prosecutor doesn't anticipate. So it's been very hard for everyone. The innocence of the child, the brutality of the act, which we can't comment specifically on at this point.
Who could do this to a child? How does a community even begin to explain what happened that day? And why is the only suspect the one she trusted and loved? This is the story that shattered a mother, stopped a city, and left the nation asking what kind of person a parent can love and trust without ever realizing they've invited a monster into their home.
And these actions killed her. Her body went through such a traumatic response. Her body shut down because it could not sustain the trauma of the rape.
Folks, this was a baby. This man violated her in a way that people shouldn't have to think about.
Because when officers walked into that small bedroom, they didn't find a sleeping child. They found a 3-year-old girl lying perfectly still, her tiny hands folded across her chest, posed, arranged, staged as if someone wanted to hide what he had done to her. Her face was scraped raw, the pigment rubbed away from being scrubbed too hard, 17 wipes tossed beside her, bloody towels piled on the floor like someone had tried desperately to clean away the truth. And behind the detectives, her mother collapsed. Her scream wasn't human. It was grief ripping through the walls. It was the realization that the man she cared for, the man she trusted with her child, is the same man who destroyed her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was brutality. This was betrayal. This was a 3-year-old girl facing a kind of horror no child should even know exists. And on that night, in that room, every parent who hears this story will feel the same cold truth. Welcome to True Crime Story Videos. Every face you'll see here once had dreams, laughter, and people who loved them. But somewhere along the way, their stories went silent. I'm Detective Daniel, and here we give those stories a voice again. Before we begin, take a moment, tell me your name and where you're watching from.
A deeper look at the house yielded that there was bloody baby shark's sheets in Josie's room, the defendant's bloody underwear, countless bloody towels.
You are a threat to society. You've shown no remorse for what you did to Josie.
Before everything went wrong, Josie was just a little girl, 3 years old. Soft voice, sweet smile, the kind of child who held her mother's hand everywhere she went, tiny, innocent, fragile in a way only toddlers can be. Josie lived with her mom in a small apartment. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and her mother tried her best, working, surviving, doing what she could to raise her daughter with love. Her mom trusted one person to help her, her boyfriend, Robert Fisher. He wasn't supposed to be a threat. He was supposed to be support. Someone who watched Josie when her mother needed a moment to breathe. Someone she believed cared about her child. But trust can be dangerous when it's given to the wrong person, and no one around them knew what he was capable of. There were no screams from the apartment, no warning signs, no messages that something was wrong, just a normal day until it wasn't. That day, Josie's mother did what millions of parents do. She left her little girl with the man she loved. She believed her daughter was safe. She believed the person she trusted would protect her baby. But while her mother stepped away, Josie was left alone with a man who had darkness inside him, a man who did not see a child, a man who did not feel shame, a man who should never have been near her. The hours that followed would destroy a family, shake a community, and leave an entire nation asking one heartbreaking question. How can a mother know someone is dangerous when that danger hides behind a quiet face? Josie never saw it coming. Her mother never imagined it, and by the time the truth came out, the damage was already done. The day of the incident began quietly. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing sounded wrong. Josie was left in the apartment with Robert Fisher, a man her mother trusted, a man she believed would keep her daughter safe. But the moment that door closed, everything changed. This was the moment the danger became real, the moment innocence was left alone with a predator. In the hours that followed, Fisher made choices no normal human being could ever explain. Choices that had nothing to do with anger, nothing to do with stress, but everything to do with cruelty. Investigators would later learn that he gave Josie medication she should never have had. Medication meant for an adult. Medication that weakened her tiny body. And once she was helpless, the horror continued. Everything that happened inside that apartment was done by someone who had no conscience, someone who saw a defenseless child and chose violence, someone who believed he could get away with it. As time passed, Josie's small body couldn't take the trauma. Her body began shutting down, her breathing slowed, her strength faded. And when it was over, Fisher didn't call for help. He didn't scream for someone to save her. He didn't even try to face what he had done. Instead, he tried to hide it. He scrubbed her face so hard that her skin began to rub off, as if wiping her clean could wash away his guilt, as if a child's life could be erased like a stain. He folded her hands across her chest, arranging her like she was sleeping, like someone peaceful, like nothing had happened. But the truth was everywhere. The wipes, the towels, the blood, the silence that didn't make sense. And while all of this was happening inside that apartment, Josie's mother had no idea, no sign, no warning, nothing to tell her that her little girl was facing her last moments. When she finally returned home, she walked into a nightmare no mother should ever experience, a scene no parent is built to survive. The moment she saw her daughter, her world shattered. The moment she realized who was responsible, her heart broke in a way that never heals. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was a deliberate act by a man who should never have been trusted with a child. And in that apartment, on that day, a tiny life was stolen, not by a stranger, but by the one person her mother believed would protect her. When the first 911 call went out, officers didn't know what they were walking into. They expected a medical emergency. They expected a child in distress. They did not expect what they found. The moment they stepped into the apartment, time seemed to slow. The lights were dim. The air was heavy. Something felt wrong before anyone even spoke. Josie's mother was shaking, trying to catch her breath, pointing toward the bedroom with a trembling hand. Her voice was barely a voice, just broken pieces of words. Nothing she said prepared the officers for what they were about to see. As they entered the room, every officer stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire apartment exhaled in grief. There she was, Josie, 3 years old, lying on her back, perfectly still, her little hands crossed over her chest, positioned, placed, arranged, not natural, not accidental. The paramedics reached her first. They touched her gently, hoping for any sign of life. But her body was cold. Her small chest didn't rise. Her pulse wasn't there. And that is when the truth began to sink in. This wasn't a child who fell. This wasn't a toddler who had trouble breathing. This was a girl who had suffered. Around her, the room told a story no one wanted to hear. Wipes scattered across the floor, a pile of bloody towels, signs that someone had tried to clean her, signs that someone had tried to erase what happened. One detective whispered under his breath, "This was staged." Another said nothing, just stared at the small body, as if trying to understand how any human being could do this to a child. Behind them, Josie's mother collapsed to the ground. Her scream tore through the apartment. It was grief so loud it echoed down the hallway and into the street. Neighbors began to gather outside, drawn by the sirens, the shouting, the unmistakable sound of a mother losing her child. People stood on porches, hands over their mouths, whispering Josie's name. The entire building felt the shock. A child they had seen playing in the hallway was now gone. Inside, detectives began their search. Every corner of the apartment was quiet, but nothing felt calm. They looked for signs of a struggle, signs of panic, signs of the truth. What they found instead was Fisher, sitting in the living room, emotionless, calm in a way that felt unnatural. Too calm for a man who had just been alone with a child who ended up dead. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. He didn't reach for Josie's mother. He didn't even stand up when officers entered. One detective later said his stillness felt like guilt. Another said his silence felt like arrogance. But the truth is simple. No innocent man is calm in a moment like that. As officers moved through the apartment, the evidence grew heavier, each piece pointing to one person. The bathroom held more wipes, more towels, more signs of cleaning, a child's underwear stained with blood. Nothing about this scene matched Fisher's blank, empty expression. Josie's brother later said he deserved the death penalty. And in that moment, looking at the evidence, many officers silently agreed. Outside, the crowd grew. Parents held their children closer. Mothers wiped tears they didn't expect. Fathers shook their heads in anger. A city was beginning to understand that something horrific had happened to a child in their neighborhood, and the man responsible wasn't a stranger hiding in the dark, but someone trusted inside the home. Police carried Josie's small body out on a stretcher. The neighbors bowed their heads. Some cried, some prayed, some stood in silence, unable to process it, and as the stretcher moved past her mother, she reached out, trying to touch her daughter one last time, a touch she was never ready to lose. The search continued for hours, not just for evidence, but for answers, for truth, for understanding, because what happened in that apartment didn't just take a child's life, it changed a family forever. It shook a community to its core, and it left investigators with a clear, painful realization. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was the work of a man who chose violence over innocence, a man who hurt a 3-year-old girl, and then tried to wipe her clean, as if the truth could be washed away. The investigation began the moment detectives realized Josie didn't die on her own. Everything in that room, every wipe, every towel, every mark on her body, told them someone caused her suffering, and the first question investigators asked was simple: who was alone with her? There was only one answer: Robert Fisher, the man sitting in the living room with no tears, no panic, no shock, a man who looked untouched by the horror around him. Detectives split up. Some stayed with the mother, trying to keep her from collapsing again. Others started photographing everything in the apartment: the bruises, the wiped surfaces, the towels soaked in blood, the signs of cleanup that no innocent person would ever need. As they looked closer, the picture became clearer. Her face wasn't just bruised, it was scrubbed, harshly, as if Fisher was trying to erase himself from her skin. One detective later said he scrubbed so hard the pigment came off. This wasn't panic. This was deliberate. In the hallway, the detectives spoke in low voices. Every piece of evidence pointed to a man who didn't just hurt her, he tried to hide it. When they questioned Fisher, he had no emotion. His answers were short, cold, detached. He didn't ask what happened to Josie. He didn't ask if she was alive. He didn't even pretend to care. One female detective later said, "We felt the plea was because we needed to know what happened, and to make him talk, we offered him 20 to life. But before any deal, investigators needed the full truth, so they went deeper. They searched the bathroom. More wipes, more blood, more signs of someone trying to scrub away guilt. They searched Fisher's clothes, blood, stains, evidence he couldn't hide. They searched the trash, a child's underwear, a piece of clothing no one could look at without feeling sick. Every discovery made detectives more certain. Josie didn't just die. She suffered. She fought for life with a body too small to survive what he did to her. Her autopsy confirmed the worst. Her body shut down from trauma. A 3-year-old system simply couldn't handle what he forced on her. When the family heard the findings, Josie's brother said he deserved the death penalty, and no one in that courtroom disagreed. The case spread quickly. News stations covered it. People gathered outside the police department demanding answers. Parents held their children tighter. Strangers cried for a little girl they had never met. Detectives met night after night, going through the timeline again and again. No inconsistencies, no confusion. Every road led back to Fisher. They confronted him with the evidence: the blood, the wipes, the staged body, the timeline, the injuries, the lies, and Fisher broke. Not emotionally, not with regret, but with the cold admission of a man who knew there was no way out. He confessed. He admitted everything. He admitted giving her medication. He admitted the assault. He admitted staging her small body afterward. He admitted trying to wipe her clean. And detectives sat there, stunned by the calm way he described it, like he was talking about a stranger, not a child who trusted him. After that confession, there was no doubt, no hesitation. Prosecutors locked in the plea deal. It wasn't justice. It wasn't enough. But it was the guarantee that this man would never walk free again. When he stood before the courtroom, mothers shook their heads in disgust. A woman said she was a baby, and this man violated her in a way no one should ever think about. Another woman cried as she spoke. He is a danger to society. He showed no remorse. His actions killed her. Her body shut down because she couldn't survive the trauma. Every word, every tear, every statement painted Fisher for what he was: a predator, a coward, a danger hiding behind a quiet face. And as the judge sentenced him to 20 years to life, the entire courtroom felt the same thing: relief that he was going away, anger that he had ever been trusted, and grief for a child whose life was stolen long before it even began. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. Not yet, because 6 weeks after entering prison, the man who hurt Josie would face the kind of fate many believed he deserved. When Robert Fisher entered prison, no one expected him to last long. Not the officers who arrested him, not the detectives who heard his confession, not the community that followed every update in the case. You don't harm a child, especially a 3-year-old, and walk freely among inmates. Prison has its own justice, its own code, its own way of dealing with men like Fisher. And from the first day he arrived, he was marked. People whispered his charges before he even stepped into his cell. Inmates watched him with the kind of quiet interest reserved only for the worst crimes. Guards later said he kept
kept his head down, walked alone, a man who knew every step he took might be his last, a man who understood exactly what kind of crime he had committed. 6 weeks, that's how long he lasted. Just 42 days after he began his sentence, news broke. Robert Fisher was dead. No warning. No long illness, no mystery. Inside those walls, everyone knew why. A Rensselaer officer later said, "We didn't expect him to have a smooth prison time. They knew what he did. The inmates knew what he did, and the world outside knew too. In a place filled with people who have done terrible things, even they have a line, even they have a limit." And Fisher crossed it the moment he hurt a child. When the news reached the community, the reaction was immediate. Some people felt closure. Some felt relief. Some felt that the justice system had stopped too soon, that he didn't live long enough to face what he had done. But many parents said the same thing. At least he can never hurt another child again. In courtrooms, people cried for Josie. In homes, families held their children tighter. And in the community where she lived, a quiet calm settled. The kind that comes only when the danger is gone. But for Josie's mother, the twist brought no peace, no comfort, no healing. The man who took her daughter was gone, but so was her little girl, and nothing in this world, not a trial, not a confession, not even the death of the man responsible, could fill the space she left behind. For detectives, Fisher's death closed one chapter, but it raised new questions about the last 6 weeks of his life, how he lived, who he spoke to, what he thought about as he walked those prison halls. But those questions didn't change the truth. A man who hurt a defenseless child met a fate shaped by the world he stepped into, a world where innocence is rare, and where harming a child is the one crime no one forgives. And just like that, the case that shattered a mother, shook a city, and outraged a nation, took its final unexpected turn. The predator died the way people feared, expected, and perhaps believed was inevitable. When the news of Robert Fisher's death spread, the public didn't ask if someone killed him. They asked why it took 6 weeks. Because Fisher didn't enter prison as a quiet inmate. He entered as a child killer, a man convicted of harming a 3-year-old girl. And in the prison world, that crime carries a mark that never fades. Theories erupted instantly. People wanted to know who got to him, and why they chose that moment. Some believed it was personal, that an inmate heard Josie's story, felt the same rage the community felt, and made a choice. Others thought it was planned, that someone watched Fisher from the day he arrived and waited for the right opportunity. Prison officials stayed quiet. They didn't confirm anything. They didn't deny anything. They simply said his death was under investigation. But the inmates talked. Whispers spread through the cell blocks long before the public knew. Whispers about a man who bragged about hurting a child. Whispers about him walking with no emotion, no guilt, no fear. Whispers that someone wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain he caused Josie. And the biggest theory of all, that his death wasn't spontaneous, it was retribution, a message, a punishment carried out by people who couldn't stand the thought of sharing space with him. One rumor claimed an inmate looked at Fisher and said, "You made a baby suffer, now feel what she felt." No one ever confirmed the quote. No one had to. People believed it because they understood the anger behind it. Outside prison walls, the theories cut even deeper. Some wondered if Fisher had shown any remorse during those 6 weeks, if he ever cried, if he ever felt the weight of what he did. Nothing in his last days suggested he had. Others wondered if he knew this was coming, if he walked those halls knowing his time was counting down, knowing that justice inside those walls would look different than justice in a courtroom. Detectives looked at the case again, but not with fear, with finality. They knew Fisher brought the consequences onto himself. And though they didn't condone violence, they understood the reality of prison. Men who hurt children rarely survive long enough to serve full sentences. For the community, Fisher's death created two groups. One group said his death was deserved. He hurt a defenseless child. He tried to erase what he did. He stole a life that barely began. The other group said nothing at all, not because they disagreed, but because they believed the universe had settled the score. And through all the theories, all the whispers, all the speculation, one truth stood above everything else. Robert Fisher didn't die because of who he was in society. He died because of what he did to Josie. He died because inmates read his charges and saw a monster. He died because even behind steel bars, there are lines no one crosses. The city watched. Parents held their children close. Mothers wiped tears they didn't expect. People whispered the same thought. This wasn't justice, but it was an ending. But even with Fisher gone, the case didn't rest. People still had questions. Painful, haunting questions that refused to fade. Questions that kept mothers awake at night and made parents rethink every choice. And those questions became the heartache that carried this story into its final chapter. When the case was finally closed, and Robert Fisher was gone, the world didn't move on. People didn't forget. Because stories like this don't fade. They stay, like scars you can't cover. Scars that whisper questions no parent ever wants to ask. How does a mother know who to trust? How does she look at someone she loves and see the danger hiding underneath? How could a little girl so small, so gentle, so dependent on the adults around her, fall into the hands of the one man her mother believed would protect her? How does a family ever breathe again after seeing what was done to their child? How does a city explain a crime that feels too cruel for words? Parents across the country watched the story unfold and felt the same cold fear. If this could happen to Josie, could it happen to any child? Could it happen to theirs? These questions stayed long after the sirens stopped, long after Fisher's death in prison, long after the cameras left the courthouse. Why didn't anyone see the danger sooner? Was there a sign, a moment, something small that could have changed everything? And the most painful question of all, the one that breaks every parent's heart when they think about Josie, what were her last moments like? Was she scared? Was she calling for her mother? Detectives still remember the silence in that room, the weight of it, the way it clung to them. A silence that carried one truth. This child died in fear and in pain, at the hands of someone she trusted. People tried to make sense of it. They tried to understand how a person could look at a child and choose violence. But there are no answers for that. Some things are simply evil. Some actions have no explanation. So the questions remained, hanging in the air, following every discussion, every courtroom interview, every parent who watched the news and held their children closer. How do you protect your child from the people you trust? And how do you live with the guilt when trust becomes the very thing that destroys you? In the end, this story is not about courtrooms. It's not about prison. It's not even about the man who caused all this pain. It's about a little girl named Josie, a child who deserved a long life, safe arms, warm mornings, and a world that protected her. Her story shook a mother, it stunned a city, and it forced a nation to look at the darkest truth of all. Sometimes the danger isn't outside the home. Sometimes it's the person we trust. Josie didn't get justice in the way people hoped. She didn't get to grow up. She didn't get to heal. But she was heard. Her name was spoken. Her story reached millions. And her memory will not disappear in silence. If there is anything to learn from her, it's that children need protection long before danger shows its face. They need voices. They need safety. They need adults who never ignore their instincts. Josie's life was short, but her impact was large. She changed conversations. She changed families. She changed the way people look at trust, danger, and the quiet monsters hiding in plain sight. So tonight, remember her. Remember the innocence she carried. Remember the love she deserved. Remember the life she never got to live. And let her story be the warning that keeps another child safe. Subscribe and comment your name and where you're watching from. And share this story. Because silence in cases like this is louder than words. This has been the story of Josie Cunningham, and the truth that broke a mother, shook a city, and made a nation ask how such evil can hide behind a trusted face.